Hello, welcome to Minors Council 2021. I'm Diana Herrington, and I will be presenting today on ages and stages, and we're going to be focusing on 8 to 15-year-olds and resisting contact with a parent. This is something that happens more often than we wish it did in family law and is some of the basis for some of our most difficult cases. So we will be exploring the reasons and the different types of resistance to contact, and also some of the ways that the court can be helpful, and some ways that mental health can help intervene, and also some tips for attorneys. So with that said, let's get started. Why do we have this problem? What happens? Why do children suddenly want to only be with one parent, or suddenly think the other parent is horrible, or have something in between, not like it's horrible, but I just don't want to be there? And when a divorce happens, then it becomes an issue of black and white. I only want to be with this parent or that parent. What's happening here? Well, most children, even in intact families, have a preferred parent. If you have children, think back to when you were raising them. There's times that they may prefer mom or they may prefer dad. Sometimes it's always one way. Sometimes it kind of changes depending on the ages of the child and what's going on. The child may have a preference, but in an intact family, usually, and when things are okay, they have adequate bonding to both parents and they have an adequate relationship with both parents. A preferred parent is different than having a parent who a child refuses to have contact with. They may say to you, if you're like minors counsel, well, I'll go to dad's, but I really like being at my mom's. Okay, mom is the preferred parent. At this point, dad is not the out parent, he's just the non-preferred. A rejected parent, and we call them RPs to make it simple, is a parent that a child refuses to have contact with, either for legitimate reasons or not so legitimate reasons. Okay, there's different types of parent-child contact problems. So let's just start at the top of our little picture here. Okay, at the very beginning, a child has strong attachments to both parents. Then we move down, and we're moving down towards where alienation and rejection happens. So we start with strong attachment to both parents. Then we move down to the child has an affinity or a preference for one parent, but they still have attachment to both parents. Moving down the line from there is the child is aligned with one parent, and the contact continues with the other parent, but the child is starting to be somewhat resistant, or just like, I don't like going over there. Then we move down to the bottom line, which is where it usually hits court cases, is justified rejection, which is the child doesn't want to go with a parent because that child legitimately has been abused by the parent, has witnessed domestic violence, the parent doesn't like the child, or there's other reasons that are legitimate. Going over to the other side is alienation, and this is when a child does not want to go with the other parent, and there's really not good reasons for it other than the other parent has started talking to the child, or actively doing things to interfere with the child's relationship with that parent. Okay. So children have preferred parents because their personalities work better together, they have shared interests, they spend the most time together. Sometimes we have one parent or the other who works in an enormous amount of time, and it may be an agreement when the parents were married that this is okay. One parent's going to be primary caregiver and the other parent's going to work a lot. Obviously, when that happens, the child may have a preference for the parent that they spend the most time with because that parent knows them the best. But when parents separate, this becomes a problem. They may also have a preferred parent because they feel most understood by that parent. It may be related to gender. Sometimes girls are more comfortable with their moms, boys with their fathers. Sometimes it's cross gender. And it's important to figure out when you're dealing with families if there's an issue of just a preferred parent so that it doesn't get out of hand. So if the issue is simply a preferred parent, the child will spend time with the non preferred parent without protest. Okay, why do children reject a parent? And we're talking about children rejecting for a legitimate reason. There may have been domestic violence. The parent may be overly controlling. They may have poor parenting and a really rigid parenting style. There may be addiction issues. And they may be rejecting of the child because they feel rejected by the child. Or they may reject a parent due to alienating behaviors of the other parent. Okay, this is where we get into what we call true alienation. There's unfounded allegations of abuse, bad mouthing the other parent and family members. And please realize when this process is going on, uh, children who previously really enjoyed their grandparents may suddenly have horrible things to say about them, not want to be involved with them. Same thing with favorite aunts and uncles. Sometimes the other parent's family dog is suddenly horrible. It doesn't go just to the parent, it becomes all invasive into the parent's environment. Another reason may be enmeshment between the favored parent and the child. Many of you are familiar with the term enmeshment, but for those of you who are not, enmeshment talks about a child and a parent, or two people, it doesn't have to be a child and a parent, who don't have good boundaries between them. In the case of a child and a parent, you hear a lot of we think. Well, we think dad is this, or we think mom is this, or we think dad shouldn't have done that, or we think mom is doing this. They don't have their own thoughts. The parent uh, encourages the child to only have their thoughts about the other parent. There's nothing left for the child's own experience. It is the experience of the adult telling the child how to have the experience of the other parent. Um, Sometimes they interfere with with the other parent's parenting time, and this becomes difficult. Sometimes uh, they have 101 reasons why the child should not go with them on their court-ordered parenting time. Or suddenly the child is sick every single parenting time that the other parent has. Um, an alienating parent often will force the child to choose a side. It's a battle, a war in their minds, and the child has to choose which side they're going to be on. And sometimes they will even say that, or the child will say to you, "Well, I have to be on mom's side, or I have to be on dad's side." They also oftentimes are treating the child as they are an adult. They are giving them information about the court case. They are telling them how sad they are, how unhappy they are, how awful it was that mom had an affair or dad had an affair, or many, many things that the child should have no knowledge of. But it's also an emotional component where the child is elevated to the level of an adult in that home and treated as such. Okay, there's multiple factors that influence children. And as we go through our presentation today, what I want you to keep in mind is there's very few pure only alienation or only legitimate resistance. It's really a combination. We call them hybrid cases, but they're very complicated, and that's why we're doing a presentation on this, because you deal with it all the time. It's very complicated and it's not black or white. So the multiple occurrences during the separation and divorce process that children react to How the child reacts is determined to a large degree by the child's temperament and vulnerability. Now, please realize children themselves have a huge impact on the role they play and how they go through a divorce. Some children are very easygoing and they're like, okay, I'm with mom, I'm with dad. The changes in the home is not a big deal. Other children that have problems with change are very resistant, and they may be resistant to change at all and may start acting out. Um, but overall, the child's personality also has to be considered, and that's why mental health becomes important in these cases. Because as attorneys, if you're representing mom or dad, you will not be seeing the child. As minors counsel, you will be seeing the child, and it's really important that you understand all of the things that go into alienation and go into resistance to contact, not just the child's opinion, not just mom and dad, not just what mom and dad are doing, but all of it put together. So each parent's personality influences how the divorce goes. How each parent reacts to the child influences how the child reacts to the divorce and to the parents. How intense the marital discord was or is, and how much the child has been exposed to that. When there's been a lot of marital discord, sometimes the children are just like, thank goodness they're getting a divorce. But many times, if one parent has been abusive or has been more the yeller or the screamer or the more emotional parent, the children sometimes feel like they need to protect that parent, or sometimes the children want to get away from that parent. So that has a huge impact on children. Siblings and their reactions. As you know, if you're dealing with a sibling group, there's usually a ringleader, and not always, but usually. And so siblings tend to, again, kind of think in a block like, we want to be with mom or we want to be with dad. If you happen to be the sibling who's out of sync with that, that's a very lonely position for a child in a family, because oftentimes the siblings give them a bad time about it, or they don't feel, many times they may not tell you as minors counsel, if they don't have time alone with you, they may not tell you that they feel differently than their siblings. So it's really important when you're working with children to make sure, if you have a sibling group, that you have individual time with each one of the children as well as group time. Extended family. Okay, we all know this one. Huge influence. Grandma and grandpas, aunts and uncles, huge influence. Sometimes they are more the influence on the children than the actual parents themselves. The divorce process itself influence children depending on how the divorce goes, if it's long and drawn out, if it's chaotic. All those things have a negative influence on the children. The professionals involved with the family, and this can include church people, professional therapists, different people that are in their lives. If how they approach the children, or how the children hear them talking about their parents and or the divorce itself, will influence how the children are reacting to it. So, what to do? Okay, so we're looking at all of this and thinking, okay, um, we know there's problems, but what do we do about it? All right, well, these are cases that take strong court involvement. If you have a child resisting contact and you are not clear about whether it's legitimate or whether it's alienation, you need to at first make a distinction and try to get to that. Is like, if there's issues of alienation, then we're going to deal with it one way. If there's issues of domestic violence, then we're going to, and legitimate reasons, excuse me, then we're going to deal with it a bit differently. But what is important when you have resistance to contact is you have to have clear, detailed court orders. Without clear, detailed court orders, nothing is going to go well. And as Matt Sullivan said, I did a quote up here. I was at a conference that Matt Sullivan and Robin Douche did. Um, and they are experts in the field through AFCC. Many of you may have read their research and their work with resistance to contact. And their quote, for those of us who have worked in the field, and you guys probably know this, is very succinct. You can't succeed without them referring to court orders, but you may not succeed with them. But without them, you don't have a fighting chance. It's important when you involve mental health in a case like this that you are working with someone who has training and experience in working with high conflict situations. Having a mental health professional who's inexperienced may actually worsen the situation. It's extremely important because in these cases, mental health is called on quite a bit to do a lot of the work and to give much needed feedback to the court and to minors counsel and to attorneys. And you need to have a mental health professional who is trained and understands what the dynamics of high conflict are. When family therapy is ordered, it's important that every single member of the family is ordered to attend. It does not work to only do therapy with the parent and the out parent and the child. That does not work. You must include the favored parent and you must include all the siblings because there are dynamics that go on moment by moment in the family that need to be addressed in therapy. Someone, either guardian ad litem, special master, therapist, bench officer, need to be responsible for the court orders being adhered to and adjustments made as needed. These are like ongoing cases. What works one week may need to be adjusted the next week. It takes a team approach to work with this. Usually when I'm doing this, depending on what role I'm in, whether I'm special master or if I'm the therapist, I'm usually working with minors counsel. If I'm special master, then I have weekly conferences, or most often weekly, sometimes a little less often, conferences with the therapist working with the family. If I'm the family therapist, then I am in touch with any individual therapist. It's very important that it's worked together as a team. Okay, so let's go over and for a bit talk about what if the reason the child is resisting visitation is legitimate, and we call this protective gatekeeping. Okay, so we're going to have to start with education and therapy for the rejected parent. We need to figure out what that parent is doing that is causing the child legitimately not to be with that parent. Many times, drug and alcohol issues are at the base of it, and if that's true, then that parent needs to go through a treatment program. Many times parents may have overly rigid, bordering on abusive or abusive parenting. They need to go to a parenting class. It's important to use, as I said earlier, an experienced mental health professional, and we work with the entire family. If the rejected parent is responsive to treatment, then we can start visitation with the therapist between the rejected parent and the child. If the rejected parent is not open to treatment, then we're pretty much at a place where it's not going to go anywhere, and the court has to make decisions on letting the rejected parent know that until they do something, nothing's going to move forward for them. It's important when the rejected parent and the child begin to have visitation that they are with a therapist. This is a protection for the child and the rejected parent because Unsupervised visitation opens up all kinds of problems for the rejected parent to act out, for the child to misinterpret what the parent does. So it's really important until there's a really stable base that when they have visitation, they have it with the therapist. Um, the favorite parent is included in therapy to support the child and the other parent's relationship. This is where the true work of working with resistance to contact cases comes in. Without getting the favored parent to understand what their role is and how damaging it is to their child to not have a relationship with the other parent. And this is even when it's legitimate, because parents by nature are protective. So we may have a mom or a dad who has not alienated, but is really, really, really nervous or anxious about having their child have any kind of relationship or visitation with the parent because they know it could go badly. So our role is to make sure that it does not go badly, that we are helping the rejected parent, but that we're also helping the favored parent to understand that things are getting better and that things can move forward with that, if that is the case. And so for being optimistic, as we're talking today, let's say that the visitation with the therapist and the rejected parent goes well. Then the visitation moves from the therapist's office to court monitored visitation in the park, restaurant, etc., for 2 to 3 hours. And this is an important transition because we need to, from the time we begin, there's a plan. And you guys, as minors counsel, you need to have that plan in your head, that we have a sequential plan of how we're going to do this, so it's not willy-nilly, so that people can count on what's going to happen, so we can evaluate what's going on. So the visitation moves to something that is fun. The park, going out for ice cream, whatever, for 2 or 3 hours. Not a real long time, just something so that the parent and child have some time that they're having enjoyable activities together, but it is still monitored. It steps up to 2-hour unsupervised visits in public, to half-day visits in home with family members present, to full day in home with family members present, and then to overnight. That phase in and of itself, it can be a very lengthy phase. And sometimes it can go quickly. Whatever the problem was has been cured, and the child has regained some trust in the parent, and it moves quickly. More often than not, this is the place where the team that's working with the family is going to have to stay connected and work quite a bit, because there's so many transitions that, because extended family is reintroduced. It's a longer period of time. It's maybe back in an environment that at one time was frightening for the child. So this can take quite a period of time. Okay, so if we're moving on to, now we're moving on to alienation is suspected, because we're still doing investigation, and we call this restrictive gatekeeping. Um, this our first bullet point here is like so important. I just can't tell you how important it is. The court orders need to make it clear there are consequences to the favored parent for not participating and supporting the court orders. If you don't have that, it is not going to go anywhere, and it is going to become very detrimental to the child, because they are the ones in the middle. The favored parent has got to understand that there are big consequences. It has to matter. It can't be, well, you get 1 hour taken away. It's got to be something that they really do not want to experience. And it does not work to say, if you don't do it, then we're going to switch custody to the rejected parent, because that is not taking into consideration what the child needs. So it's really important that the consequences for the favored parent or about the favored parent, whether they're financial or whatever the bench officer comes up with, or has, finds is successful. Uh, that's really important that those are in place. Therapeutically, when we're doing restrictive gatekeeping, the therapist works first individually with the child, then individually with the rejected parent, and then with the favored parent, and then with them as a unit. Throughout the time that we're working, we use different dyads. Sometimes you'll meet with the favored parent and the child, sometimes the rejected parent and the child, and sometimes all three together. So we need orders that allow us to move around and do whatever dyad we need to do at whatever time. Um, it's important for minors counsel to understand that although there may be true alienation, there also may be poor parenting by the rejected parent, or rigid parenting, or counter rejection. So that's why we're working with them as well as the favored parent. We may ask that the rejected parent that has rigid parenting style go and get some individual help, some individual therapy for a different way of approaching parenting and the child, connecting with them in a different way. When we're working together, the visitation begins in the therapist's office, and then again, it has a plan. We move it to visitation in a public place that gives a parent, the rejected parent, and the child a place to have some fun, and watch that they are not left alone. And this most often when we're talking about the rejected parent and the child, this is for the protection of the rejected parent, because children who have been alienated will lie, just straight out lie. They will misinterpret. They will say something like, you'll say, well, did you have fun at the park? Well, no, dad kicked the ball, and the dad kicked the ball and I lost my ball. And he did that on purpose. If you were there, the reality was dad kicked the ball, it went somewhere and they couldn't get it. It had nothing to do with dad doing it on purpose. But that's how children will interpret things and come back to you. So you have to really make sure that until things are stabilized, that there is always a neutral third party with them, because you will not get the truth necessarily just out of the child. You will get the child's perspective, which is not necessarily based in reality. Once we've gotten that section of visitation and the relationship has moved on and it has some kind of stability, we move it to 2 hours unsupervised, and that usually, or at least for me, when I will make that recommendation, it is when I'm pretty sure that the child no longer is going to make false allegations and has some buy-in to time with the parent. After that, visitation steps up to 2 hours unsupervised, 4 hours unsupervised in a public place, to a full day before an overnight is attempted. It's important, and this becomes an issue sometimes, to not schedule visitations over something that is very important to the child, like they were going to go to a special birthday party, a team party, whatever. If the family has moved forward a bit, the rejected parent can take the child, but that doesn't happen actually until mom and dad have worked out and have some trust level with each other. But it's really important not to schedule the visitations over special events, because the child comes to it with resentment and it's counterproductive. Again, it's not recommended that the favored parent be allowed to also be there if it's visitation or it's a special event. Sometimes it's a birthday party and the favorite parent says, okay, well, he can take them, but I'm going to be there. Not a good idea. At this point, the rejected parent needs to have their own time without the favored parent there. Extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles have all often been included as bad by the child. And so you can start working them into visitations after the rejected parent and the child have developed some rapport. Um, it's important that the therapist is monitoring the favored parent and the child during this time to keep the process on track and to be able to report to the court if the favored parent is interfering or not cooperating. This is huge. Favored parents don't give up easily, and they find many ways of interfering. And during this time, it's also kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. Uh, and so mental health needs, or whoever's supervising needs to stay involved. If the child is 10 or above, they also need to be made aware that they are being held responsible for their behavior. Um, I have had teenagers who are absolutely horrid to the rejected parent, and have had to spend many sessions with them with that behavior is not acceptable. And that happens because the favored parent has allowed the child to be disrespectful to the rejected parent and done nothing about it. Um, and many times these children that are alienated are perfectly well-behaved children at school, at church, on their teams. They're perfectly well-behaved everywhere except with the rejected parent, and then they have absolutely horrid behavior that is not acceptable. So they need to the therapist needs to work with them, and they need to be held accountable by minors counsel that their behavior has to be within a range of acceptability. Um, so going on to that, uh, this is where the favored parent is expected to not laugh at or condone bad behavior on behalf of the children. That's what I was talking about. They sometimes will laugh at some of the horrid things that children have done. Had that been done to them, that child would have been on restriction for the rest of their life, possibly. But they will laugh at it when the child has done it to the rejected parent. Okay, if there have been allegations of sexual abuse that have been found to be false, it's still important for the rejected parent to have someone with them when they are with the child until the threat of false allegations has passed. This also brings into play the issue of sometimes when we're dealing with a parent who has a encapsulated delusion that the other parent is sexually abusing the child. And no matter what evidence is presented to the court, no matter what evidence is investigated, it always comes back that there is no sexual abuse because there is no sexual abuse. But the parent with the delusion is convinced that there is. It's a very difficult situation to deal with because that parent is not saying it or doing it to get at the other parent. They believe it. Doesn't have a good outcome. We don't really have good outcomes with this. But it's really important for everyone, the legal team as well as the mental health team, if we're dealing with this, to protect the parent who is not abusing the child, because there's been many parents that have gone down a very difficult road of continuous sexual abuse allegations that have gotten worse and worse and worse to the point that they have given up having a relationship with their child because they are so harassed legally as well as emotionally about something that is not happening. It's also important to realize that children can be given what's called memories that are not their own memories. Um, if a child is young enough, and usually, around 5 or 6, um, a parent can say, "Do you remember when your dad did this or your mom did this?" And at first the child's like, "No." And they're like, "Well, remember?" And then they describe a situation. If you do that often enough, that becomes a memory, a false memory for the child. And when that is taken into the realm of sexual abuse, that child then believes that they have been sexually abused, and in many ways suffers emotionally and relationally in the same manner as if they had been abused. So when you're dealing with an encapsulated delusion in that sense, um, we don't have, as I said, we don't have a lot of good answers, but as well as protecting the parent that is being falsely accused, it's really important to protect the child. And sometimes that means the person with the encapsulated delusion cannot be alone with the child, and it has to be supervised visitation. Um, and unfortunately, sometimes there's some really hard decisions that have to be made that way, because the parent who uh, has encapsulated delusion may be a wonderful parent, absolutely wonderful, except for in this one area where they are wreaking havoc in their child's life and they believe they're protecting the child. And sometimes the other parent is not a bad parent, but if we're looking at which home would be probably the better home for the child, that would not be the home we would place the child in, because that parent may work a lot or just not be as connected to the child. But that may be the home that the child ends up in, because the other home is going to continually tell that child that they're being sexually abused. It's very difficult. Those are hard cases, and bench officers have very difficult decisions they have to make in those cases. Moving on, it's important that corporal punishment or other physical uh, discipline is not used by the rejected parent in these cases. Although corporal punishment is not against the law, parents are allowed to spank their children. They're not allowed to beat them, but they are allowed to spank them. Um, but when there's been estrangement and alienation, the rejecting parent is putting themselves at risk and the relationship at risk if they use physical discipline. They need to have therapist or parenting coach, parenting class, help them learn very effective non-physical methods of discipline. These days, many times, that involves taking the phone away or restricting game time, um, things like that. It has to be something that matters to the child that's taken away, but it's important that is used instead of physical discipline. Um, it's also important to help the rejected parent understand that while they are reestablishing their relationship with the child, and this is long term, I mean, we're not talking 3 months, this goes on for a long time. Um, the rejected parent needs to not feel compelled to address poor grades, um, poor behavior somewhere else, those kind of things. Well, not so much poor behavior. They need to address poor behavior between them and the child. But this is not the time for them to become the parent who is going to say, well, you got a B instead of an A, or you got to fail, and now you can't go to, you shouldn't be allowed to go out with your friends to the movie, or whatever it is. That really needs to stay with the favored parent during this process, because um, the child's going to interpret the rejected parent as being overly rigid, no matter what they do. And many times the rejected parents do tend to be somewhat overly rigid, and have stricter rules that really are necessary. It does not help the reunification process. So during the reunification process, it's kind of like it's okay for mom or dad to be Disneyland mom or dad during that time. And by that, I don't mean necessarily buying them a bunch of gifts or spending time or taking them to Disneyland, literally, but it's okay for them not to be the heavy handed disciplinarians in the family at that time. They need to sit back and work on developing the relationship with the children and trust with the children rather than jumping in and disciplining the children for bad grades or too much time on the video on the computer, whatever. Now, when the child is with them, they obviously do not need to provide computer time that is inappropriate or anything like that, but they don't need to be making comments about what goes on at the favored parent's home. They need to leave that alone. Their job is just to work on developing their relationship with the child. And I think this is where Minors Council can be very helpful to the rejecting parent, because you very likely are going to be the one that has most contact with them and maybe in their home, and helping them understand that that's their job, just to reconnect with their child, and that's a big job in and of itself. um, Many times, and I have it I have written down here, when home visits resume, a list of chores to be done in the limited time the child is with the rejected parent is not recommended. It amazes me sometimes, and this comes again kind of to the rigidity sometimes of the rejected parents, is the moment home visits resume, even though the child's only there for a day, they're like, okay, well, you have to help do dishes, or, these are your chores. And of course, not being, picking up after themselves, and, not, if you spill something, clean it up, put your dishes in the dishwasher, whatever is perfectly acceptable. But it's not acceptable for the child, when they have limited time at the rejected parent's home and are just starting, to be pulled back into the chore chart, so to speak. They're not there that much of the time. They need that time with the parent again to keep getting the relationship back on track as the time is increased. And if every other weekend or something comes up down the line, then of course they need to be responsible for putting their stuff away, helping with dishes, whatever. But they really should not be the ones that are doing the vacuuming or whatever, unless they're really, if they're there a lot of, a good portion of time, of course. But again, it's timing and getting things back on track. Okay. Um, Many times you're going to be dealing with a family that has multiple siblings. Um, and as all children are different, if you have children of your own, you know that your oldest and your youngest and your middle child, or however many you have, probably all came into the world with very different personalities. And as you were raising them, you learned to deal with each one of their personalities individually. The same is with dealing with multiple siblings in a custody case where there's resistance to contact. Um, there may be one child, usually the oldest, who's most invested in rejecting the rejecting parent. Uh, this child, they will influence and bully the other children to reject the other parent. Um, and this needs to be paid attention to and intervention made, because it really does become an issue where the children who may feel differently just clam up and give up a relationship that may honestly be very important to them, or they may not really have the issue that the other children have. Many times the oldest child has been involved in and knows much more of the details. negative details of the divorce than the younger children do. Uh, I mentioned earlier how sometimes an alienated child is treated as an adult. Many times, this is the oldest child, and the mother or father may have used them as confidants to talk about whatever went wrong, whether there was affairs or working too much or domestic violence or whatever. But that child has become the confidant of the favored parent and usually gets perks for being for supporting the favored parent and does not want to give up that position. So they many times will bully the other children in the family to go along with what we call the party line. Um, they will reject the siblings. I've worked with families where two siblings will quit talking to one sibling and make their life really difficult at home because that one sibling says, well, I'm okay going to see mom. I get along with mom. I don't have a problem with mom. And the other two are, well, you can't love us. Uh, you're not being honest. You know all these things mom has done. And the other child is like, those I those things don't bother me, or I didn't know mom did that. Um, so it's a very difficult situation for a child who wants to have contact with the rejected parent but has siblings who do not. When working with the children, individual work is important so that, as I said, the weaker children have a chance to express their feelings without their older siblings or other siblings overriding them. And I think this is really, this obviously is for us as mental health professionals, but also really important for um, minors counsel because, and I think sometimes it takes time to develop, for minors counsel to develop a close enough relationship with the children individually so that they will really tell you what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. Um, Sometimes individual visitations are most effective at allowing each child to repair their relationship with the other parent. And let me tell you, if you suggest that, let's say we have three siblings or two siblings, and that you are going to encourage individual visitation, you will probably get the biggest pushback from the favored parent. And it usually goes something like this. No, 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 no. The children, well, I know the children have to go. I know there's a court order, but the children are really afraid to go alone. And so they'll go, but they'll only go if they can all go together. That I can, that's almost verbatim for many cases I've dealt with. And you've probably dealt with, same thing. Um, and so it's important that the children are taught and learn and have the experience that they're safe individually with their parent. Um, and that's not going to go easy. You may have to, again, go back to your mental health professional and have the mental health professional start with doing individual visitations in the office and then moving them outside of the office. The same process that we did with the family as a group, and helping each child work out whatever they do or do not have bothering them with the parent, the rejected parent. Okay. Um, the outcomes of these kind of cases are not always good. They're very, very difficult cases. The positive outcomes, if there are positive outcomes, depend as much on circumstances, the personalities of the family, the age of the child, as they do on appropriate court orders and competent therapeutic interventions. Um, Depending on when these cases come into family law or into the therapeutic milieu, uh, has a lot to do with how successful we can be. Um, Time is an enemy of reunification. The faster these cases are processed and identified as high conflict, resistance to conflict, and put into a therapeutic modality that therapeutic team is working with a legal team to work on this, the bigger chance we have of making an impact. These cases, and I think um, family law has learned over the last several years, because of research that's come out, that these cases need to move quickly into treatment. Previously, what used to happen was there was delays where someone would come in and say, okay, kid's not wanting to go, and then they would order a 7:30 evaluation or a 31:11, or sometimes just, well, let's just do some therapy between the rejected parent and the child. And so while all of this is going on, the alienation is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the accepted protocol has changed quite a bit um, for treatment, in that time is of essence. If you have a case as minors counsel and you think that it's moving in the direction, or when you got it, it's already there, that a child does not want to see a parent, or they're starting to be hesitant, that's the time to move into treatment, and trust that the treatment team, maybe along with a 7:30, it can determine whether it's alienation or legitimate. But regardless, the treatment needs to start so that we don't have this 8 month, 9 month long period of time where the alienation takes on deeper and deeper and deeper roots. Nothing ever, I won't say nothing, because that's probably not totally true. Um, Rarely do these cases heal in time without intervention. They just get worse. So, early intervention is the key into hoping that these cases can get better. Um, Sometimes, especially with older 13 to 15-year-olds, the goal becomes to keep a thread of relationship, that when the child matures, they have something to come back to. There's many cases where the court will give up, the therapeutic team will give up, that we've done everything. The child will not see the parent. They just resist. And as they get older, it becomes unmanageable to have them go. But then the goal is maybe not visitation in visitation in the home, or split custody or shared custody, but it does become trying to keep some kind of connection between the child and the parent. So as the child matures and gets older, they have something there to go back, that they have maintained some kind of contact with the parent, that maybe when they're a bit older, that they can go back or continue to enhance that relationship and have a relationship with that parent. Um, I know many times the issue does become for a parent when they have seriously alienated adolescents, that they do have to let go, because their life has to go on. Nothing's going to change with the children. And they have to trust that maybe as that child gets older, they will come back to them and have a more adult view of what occurred, and be willing to have a relationship with them. It's very heartbreaking to work, to be part of the team working when a parent has to give up. But sometimes they have to. Just, years of litigation is not going to fix these cases. There's a time where one has to say, we've done everything we can, and it is what it is. And hopefully when the child is older, they will resume a relationship with that parent. Um, but I'm not talking about very young children. I'm talking about when children are older, 13, 15, 15, 16, 17-year-olds definitely, sometimes you just have to allow, the parent has to say, I've done what I can, and I can only hope for the best later on. I hope this has been a helpful presentation. And if there's one thing I would leave you with thinking about this is it's important to, as I said, do intervention as early as possible. It's important to use experienced mental health professionals in a team to assist you as minors counsel. Um, it's important that you realize that no matter what the bench officer does, no matter what you do as minors counsel, no matter what we do as mental health, many of these cases will not resolve with the positive outcome that we would like. But many will, and those that do are the ones that make it worthwhile to attend trainings, to work hard, and be an advocate for the child, because children, for the most part, do need both parents. And even though the parents may not know that, as minors counsel, you're the one that carries the reasonable thought that maybe the child and the parent can reunite and can work through things. There's no perfect parent. And I think sometimes when we're, those of us who deal in court cases, because we're dealing with real people, I have to be careful not to expect either family to be perfect. Families are going to have their strengths and their weaknesses, and that's okay. But what we're looking for is just to help children and parents have an adequate relationship so that children have the support of their parents as they launch themselves into adulthood. Hope this has been helpful. Thank you so much.